Hey all, welcome back to another episode of the Texas SignalCast. I'm your host, Joe Deshotel, and I'm here with my co-host, Jessica Montoya-Coggins. Hello, Jessica.
Hey guys.
We're back for another week to talk about how awful the Texas Legislature is and who their latest targets are. In this case, we've got a slew of trans bills, we've got permitless carry, we've got more voter suppression bills hitting the floor now. But I think today we want to start off talking about the permitless carry and what that actually is and means. That's being heard on the floor today. This has been a long time agenda item for the right in Texas. Back in 2015, the Texas Tribune did a poll and found that only 10% of Texans support permitless carry. And for those who don't know, that essentially means you don't need a license, you don't need training to have or own or a gun or carry it openly or concealed anywhere in the state of Texas. And, part of this is, has announced some gun legislation and some executive action. This is all part of the show. So I don't know if you've been following these, Jessica, but I think you have been talking to some folks at Gun Sense or at least gun safety organizations. Do you have any thoughts on what's happening there at the
Yeah,
ledge?
I mean it was very sinister, as you said, that this bill has come up, and Moms Demand Action and a lot of the other gun safety organizations. These have been really huge grassroots movements, not just in Texas but around the country. So I actually got alerts from these national organizations about this. And, there was also a group of religious leaders that came to the Capitol. They were wearing white. And so many Democratic members also wore white to stand in solidarity with them against this legislation. And they were actually kicked out of the Capitol, which is, I don't know what level of hands-made tale that is, but that's pretty high just to do that. But no, it is very, very scary. And I've talked a lot over this past session with Representative Jasmine Crockett. She has been very vocal against this, as have been many members. Representative Crockett is herself someone who has seen firsthand gun violence, which is not something that I knew. She shared that on Twitter. So yeah, this is very, very scary. And it is, I think, something that we're going to see ramifications of if this does ultimately end up on Abbott's desk.
Yeah, and it's just funny. So the North Texas former Senator Don Huffines, who's from your neck of the woods, basically, I think he said something like, finally the ledge is doing something. Like, this is what he's been fighting for years when he was in the legislature. And one of the reasons why I think he's even threatening now to potentially run for governor is for this type of thing to put out there. And I think it's so, you use a good word, sinister. It's been that we're seeing these voter suppression bills go through right now, all about voter ID, which a lot of these bills aren't even about voter ID. We already have that in Texas. They just tried to frame it that way because that's actually a popular item policy for most people. And I think mostly just on branding. I don't really think people understand what the actual voter ID laws are in Texas. They just say, oh yeah, sure, I have a driver's license. Why shouldn't you have to show that to vote? And one of the pieces of ID they will allow you to use is, of course, your concealed handgun license. So it's interesting that
You cannot use a college ID though. No.
No, you cannot use a college ID, a state-issued college ID, mind you, to vote. But you can use a concealed handgun license, and you won't even need it anymore to actually carry a gun. So what's actually even the point of having a concealed handgun license anymore? But it's pretty wild, and there's a lot of people that have, been victims of, gun violence on a number of different levels. I mean, I've actually been held up and robbed at gunpoint before. I didn't really have anything to give, but I was very lucky that the guy didn't know how to use a gun, because he absolutely tried to shoot me, and he was like trying to pull the trigger, and I guess it didn't work. And so we I kind of like fought him off, and then I ended up running behind a dumpster, which he like chased me behind. And then some people heard commotion, and they came outside. He ran off, and then he pulled the trigger and shot the gun, which tells me he had no idea what he was doing. He had no idea how to use the gun. Now, in that case, I'm glad he didn't know how to use the gun, but wouldn't it have been better if he didn't have it in the first place? I mean, the people who are, you know, the good guy with the gun scenario, those people who wait for that scenario, which is a really weird thing to just kind of like daydream about, but those people, you know, a lot of them aren't trained, and they need to be if they're going to carry around a gun and kind of wait for this sort of like, I don't know, I want to say sort of like Rambo scenario where they can pull out their AR-15 and save the day or whatever. But I mean, the training, you may remember this, but last session they lowered the training requirement. It was essentially a 2-day course, you know, because it was something like 12 hours, or basically it was like 2 classes that you could do over 2 days, and they lowered it to make to like 4 hours or something like that. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I do remember last session they lowered the requirements. And so this time their effort is, of course, to totally remove the requirements altogether. Absolutely astonishing when you think that, you know, guns do kill people despite what they think. And if they don't, and they think it is the people that kill people, well, it's the people that we're actually trying to train and the people that we want to actually have a permit so they don't kill people. So whatever frame you want to use, it's really irresponsible. And to think that they're doing that and at the same time pushing all these voter suppression bills is just mind numbing, and it just tells us about our priority issues that these guys have up there. You know, I just don't know what it's going to take for them to be freaked out or scared or change their priorities. I don't know if you've seen any indication that they plan to.
I don't think so. And I'm so sorry to hear about your experience, Joe, because that is, I think, a very traumatic thing to deal with and to have happen to you. And, you know, as you say, the idea that people could just operate these guns without any sort of knowledge of them or any permitting is very scary. You have to have a permit to cut hair in Texas. You need to have a permit or some sort of licensing requirement to become a yoga instructor. Like these are things, and I love hairstylists. I love all yoga instructors. I think they're awesome. But like these are the things that we ask of them. So I'm not entirely sure why we're having less for a gun owner. And I think to your point where you mentioned Rambo, I think that scenario does come up for a lot of folks where like they assume, you know, we might be in some post-apocalyptic, I don't know, maybe like a Walking Dead type of situation, and you need to have all these firearms. But you know, so far that I think that is probably, hopefully, you know, not something we have to worry about. But very much we do have to worry about the wrong people having guns. And I feel very sorry. We have a lot of younger folks on the Texas Signal staff. And I mean, they have lived pretty much their entire lives going through school, doing these gun drills, like the kind that I remember having tornado drills as a child. I don't remember, you know, shooter drills. And this is something that we are having, you know, kids as young as 6 basically do. And, you know, obviously Texas has seen school shootings. Texas was also obviously the El Paso shooting in 2019. Which is still the largest mass shooting event for Latinos in this country. I mean, and I know a number of representatives from El Paso were mentioning that. This is I think also going to have ramifications from people possibly thinking about moving to Texas. Do you really want to be in a state where you could just go to a Chipotle and there'll be someone with an armed gun like next to you? Do you want that? I don't.
Yeah, and you can't question why, you know, why they might have that, or should they, or do they know how to use it, or any of that. And it's intimidating to people. And I'm not even against gun ownership at all. And I grew up with guns. I grew up hunting, but there are, you know, legitimate, you know, uses, and we had to my dad always made sure that I knew what I was doing and I knew how to use them, and it was done safely, and a lot of rules around it, because that's one mistake and it could be fatal. And we've seen it so many times. And on the same day that Abbott said that he was going to make Texas a gun sanctuary state, which is really just one of the dumber things I've ever heard of. Basically, that same day he made that statement on Twitter, there was a police officer that was shot along with other people in a workplace. And without background checks and things like that, I mean, it's not going to stop everybody. But man, if every life is supposed to be sacred and they're supposed to be pro-life, you would think this stuff would matter. And it's just they're catering to such a small group. And it makes a lot of sense that they feel they could cater to 10% of the population when they're doing all these other voter suppression efforts to reduce the other end of that 90% who look at this kind of stuff and say, wait a minute, what are you doing? And to your point, businesses are looking at it. People who want to move to Texas are looking at this stuff and they're shaking their head. And one of the other things we mentioned, there are a lot of corporations now that are finally starting to come out on this SB7 and these voter suppression bills, and people are, really starting to, I think, change their attention from just Georgia to now seeing what's actually happening in Texas, which is really important because we're, several times larger than Georgia, and the potential here they know is that they can continue to win the White House, continue to slow progress on the national stage as long as they can keep Texas voters from the polls. And it's, very unfortunate. So let's switch and kind of talk about some of the things that do scare Republicans, like, I don't know, trans athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point about that, we have seen a slew of anti-trans legislation, particularly as it affects athletes. And this is the NCAA actually issued a kind of a warning to states that are, enacting this legislation, that they will no longer be holding college championships in states with the bills that we are seeing from this Texas legislature. And I mean, that's going to have huge financial impacts for Texas already in 2022. The men's NCAA was scheduled to have several games that were going to be played.
Yeah.
So the NCAA was, so they are very much, I think, saying, don't test us on this. And we're, the Baylor men's team, to their credit, they won the championship this year. I think it would be very embarrassing for them if they're going into next year trying to defend that championship, and they're not there. There's going to be no games in Texas, and that goes for all sports. This tournament, the NCAA women's tournament, was played I think the entirety of Texas. I'm not saying the NCAA is a great organization. I'm still they kind of tick me off. Technically, March Madness only applies to the men's tournament, which is just. But on this, they are completely correct. And so, yeah, there's just a slew of bills, and a lot of these bills too are just cruel. There's nothing at all in the medical community that they are trying to protect. There was a lot of heartbreaking testimony at the Capitol from, children that as young as 10 years old, which I know as a 10-year-old, I would never have been able to have gone to like a Capitol and testified. And yet they were doing this, and along with their parents and guardians, basically saying like, this is just flat out discrimination.
I mean, it's just so awful, and this wasn't even an issue 10 years ago. Like, I mean, really just about 5 years ago is when this stuff started happening, as far as I can remember and tell.
And it was actually interesting. So when SB 29 is one of Dan Patrick's legislative priorities with one of these bills that would discriminate against transgender athletes. And a lot of the Democrats on the Senate were basically saying, like, in 2017, y'all said, if we don't pass this bathroom bill, it's going to be the end of the world. There's just going to be, men just like storming into women's locker rooms.
Yeah.
Which to my knowledge, the only like misconduct, like the only public misconduct I know of in a bathroom involved a Republican senator. But that's a whole
Yeah,
other
I
story.
remember that guy.
That's a whole other, yeah, that's a whole other
Yeah,
story.
in an airport. Yeah.
Yeah, and so
So
so State Senator John Whitmire basically said, y'all tried this 4 years ago, and nothing. When we didn't pass this bill, nothing happened.
no, but it's like you said, but it's the very real thing that can happen is businesses not coming here, major events not coming here. We lose conferences and all kinds of other business and growth opportunities for communities because of these decisions they're making. And it's been done already. We saw in Georgia some movies that were being filmed there pulled out, and some other employers were threatening to move out, and then Republicans went nuts over it. In Texas, the same thing. They made essentially threats, that and I think it was Ted Cruz who filed a bill, or at least threatened to take away this nonprofit status, I think, of the NCAA, was it? So
Yeah, he's been on a rampage. He's also been very so the Major League Baseball pulled their All-Star game out of Georgia, and so he and some other senators, cobbled together a bill to, I think, strip them of some antitrust legislation. But yeah, no, they're very mad, and other progressive states have actually kind of jumped on this. So New Mexico also does a lot of film production, along with Georgia, and so their governor and their legislature has sort of made it very well known that our state, we've got the blue trifecta here. We're not going to have these discriminatory policies, and they also, I think, just legalized marijuana a few days ago, so that's another bonus for our neighbor state.
Yeah, the enchantment state.
Yeah.
So if you want to go get enchanted, that's the place to be.
New Mexico.
So I don't know if you saw this, but Senator Lois Kolkhorst basically was at the Texas Nationalist Movement event. They are the folks that push secession. Their GOP state party chair has been pushing this idea as well. She essentially endorsed the conversation and saying that she would vote to allow them to have the vote, and they broke out in applause. They're very happy to hear that. But I feel like we're just going down a really long rabbit hole with these folks.
Yeah, I believe she is the first. Yeah, she's the first state senator to endorse this. There's obviously a couple of House members, and I believe the author of this, he was at the January 6th insurrection, and is not turning over his correspondence from that day. But yeah, no, this is as far as, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but this is kind of treason. I think the
just
word
a little bit.
Just a bit. So this is pretty nuts that this is even up for discussion, although I think maybe the way this Republican Party has been going, this was always maybe kind of their end goal, which I don't know. Does then Mexico get to come back and be like, well, actually, it was very shady the way y'all took over this territory back in the 1800s. So, we now actually lay claim to Texas again, which in many ways they might have that argument there. But yeah, this is pretty nuts.
Yeah, it's about as legitimate as Texas seceding itself. Because we've already, we fought, they fought a battle over it in 1836, but we also fought a battle over it again in 1865, and we lost that argument. So yeah, I think you're right. I think if Texas were to even try to do that, and it's so silly, as you point out, the guy who supports the secession bill was at the siege on the Capitol. That's insane. And then you got the state party chair who's backing this idea as well. They're backing this idea all while saying it's the Democrats who hate America. It's the Democrats who don't respect the flag or the anthem or any of the things that are mean national pride. And that is so mind blowing. So they're going to ban and protest and cancel sports, professional sports, and I guess college sports. Meanwhile, there's also one of the priority bills of the lieutenant governor is to mandate the national anthem at these events that they plan to protest. So in a roundabout way, they're essentially protesting the national anthem by mandating it at events that they plan to protest or cancel.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see which Republicans vote for like the national anthem bill, but then also vote to secede. So that'll be a fascinating day.
Whew, yeah, pretty bad. Well, so we always like to try to end on a high note. I hope you have a better one than mine. The only one I can come up with is that the official session ends in about a month and a half. And that's really about the best news I can come up with right now. But, unfortunately, they'll be back again to do some gerrymandering. They got to take a breather for the summer, and then they'll come back to gerrymander the congressional seats. But in the meantime, hopefully we can kill some of these really bad bills.
Yeah, that's true. And you're right. I do try to keep it on a positive note. It is hard. This week was challenging, to say the least, I think, if you were looking for positive news out of Austin and the state capitol. But you know what? Look, there are local elections happening in a lot of places in May. And so y'all should really check out a lot of local candidates. I had the opportunity on my other podcast, Tex Mix, to talk with a really, really neat candidate out of Round Rock. And so, and she got the official endorsement from the Democratic Party, as well as a lot of other places. So that is something to keep in mind, that, local elections really do matter. And we've got some important ones coming up.
And what are they running for? Or what is she running for?
Oh, yes. So this is Yannicka Parrish. She is running for city council out of Round Rock, District 3.
One of the fastest growing cities in the country.
Yeah. We talked about the traffic issues. That was one of the reasons she ran.
Oh yeah, well that makes sense. Yeah. It's kind of funny since Republicans are also fighting infrastructure now. How that's gonna all shake out. One little bitty tiny piece of good news, I guess I can say, is that Texans are getting vaccinated. I will get my second shot on Saturday. And we've been tracking on this podcast Texas compared to other states. Well, we've moved up a little bit. We were like 48th a couple of weeks ago. Now we're like 39th. And I looked at the states.
We cracked the 30s.
We did. We are almost halfway there. And, the states that we lead, though, unfortunately, they're all in the South, I think, except for one. But they're all red states, except for Georgia, which you could argue this is actually a state level issue, in which case Georgia at the state level is still a very red state. So it just kind of paints a picture for where we are.
Yeah, I'm my 2-week anniversary of my second shot actually comes up tomorrow. So I've got some limited plans, but they're still plans. So I am excited.
No, freedom. That's good for you. Congratulations. Happy for you. And I'll be right behind you in just a couple of weeks. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it will be out, and I look forward to getting out again and living pre-pandemic life as best we can. So, yeah. Well, okay. Well, thanks again for everyone for joining us. It's been another, fun time talking about this Texas Legislature and their attempts to take away all your rights. But we'll be back here again. And in the meantime, another special thanks to our patrons out there who support this podcast. If you want to help support progressive journalism in Texas, please consider going to texassignal.com and finding our Patreon at the top and joining that. We really appreciate it. You also get some cool merch that comes along with that, so you can let everybody know how you support progressive journalism in the state of Texas. So until then, later, y'all.
Bye, guys.